everyone. So I'm going to be talking today about one of my preferred seed starting methods. I built these boxes probably 4 years ago out of Redwood Fence Pickets. I reuse them every year. They're assembled with screws here. It takes about a picket and a half. These are a 6-inch picket. You could use cedar as well. They've held up over the years. I use the same material on the bottom. This is a really great method for growing greens and like kale and chard, arugula, and really just to get them started. Once the starts get to be about yay high, that's when I like to then carefully prick them out and transplant them out into the garden. But as you can see, we've got snow here and it's a bit too early for some things just because I don't have season extension methods in the garden. So I'll be using these flats, starting them inside for the first week or two until they germinate, and then once they're on their way and getting started, they'll get moved into the greenhouse. Once it's warmed up and the conditions are right, later this spring, they'll get transplanted out to the garden. So I have used cell trays before, which are fine for other things, but I do love this method. It gives the roots plenty of room to grow. You can really cram a lot of seeds in here. Then once they get going, they're really quite easy to transplant. So again, I would use these to grow leafy greens like spinach and chard and arugula and kale and such, and really densely plant them. Then they transplant out super easily. Things I wouldn't use these flats for are root vegetables such as beets and radishes and carrots, because they don't like to have their roots disturbed. Nor would I really recommend it for peas, because they too don't like their roots to be disturbed. I have done tomatoes in them and they work just fine, which maybe I'll do that this year. We'll see. But again, these are just great for really cranking out a bunch of greens early on in the season. And I'm going to show you how I do it. So I assembled these boxes with screws. Again, I used nails one year. They all just popped out, of course, because all of the moisture. So I highly recommend using just any screw, but an exterior decking screw is ideal. So I like to line the bottom with newspaper. That just helps the soil stay in place, but still allows for plenty of drainage. And then we'll make our seed mixture. My seed start mixture, I've been using this blend for years and it's working just fine. So it is just peat moss and composted manure that I got from a nearby horse boarding ranch. They pile it up and you just go there and they fill the truck up. So I would say it's roughly 50-50 blend, maybe erring on a lighter side of the composted manure. The seeds aren't going to be in the flats for that long. They don't need that much nutrients. Other years I've added perlite to the mix, but it just doesn't really seem necessary. There's plenty of aeration within the soil structure. I find that the store-bought seed start mix is really expensive, which is fine if you're going to, start a small amount of seeds. I have my flat lined and I'm going to fill it now. I also want to talk about the soil moisture. I really like to saturate it so that it's plenty damp for when I'm starting my seeds. I'd like to try and get any dry spots mixed in. Sometimes I'll just really drench it, oversaturate it, because it will drain out the bottom of that flat. So it's always a good idea to saturate your seed start medium before you put it in the planter, because it's really hydrophobic actually. So if I were to put that dry mix in here and then try and wet it, it would just drip everywhere and kind of overflow from the top. So putting it all in a big basin, I love the tub for this larger scale mixing, and really saturating it. And then once you fill it into the flat, it'll drain out and be ready to then plant, but it's just much easier this way. I'm just gonna mix it up and make sure that there are no dry spots in there, which can be tricky. Take your time with this part because it's just much easier to do it here than it is in that. This is our first snow this winter in Arizona, northern Arizona, where I am, and it's wonderful. And Booker's been very patient all day, waiting to go to the forest. So once I'm done doing these things, we're gonna head up there. Oh, that is soupy. I'd say the goal with the depth of these is you want it deep enough so you're maximizing your root depth, but just below the edge of the box, the top edge, there's a dry spot, so that when you go to water, it doesn't just run off the sides. There. So this will drain out. I'm gonna fill the other ones. These are just nice to kind of prep a whole bunch of them at once. Then you get to sit down and do your seeding. So we'll leave that to do its thing here. Another great thing about this method is that, you know, you're not really wasting anything. Eventually these boxes do break down. This is a pretty old one, but after things get transplanted out of them, you can turn it upside down and dump it all into the compost. It's all good stuff that can add to your yummy compost pile. All right, just gonna quickly crank these out. Can only find cardboard, which actually I had a thought is probably better than the newspaper, which is just going to disintegrate as it is in those two. It would probably be wise to redo those, but I'm going to leave them as is for now. Time to get some arugula started. Definitely some chard. Take these inside and I'm going to soak them for probably just overnight. It just helps them get going and germinate a bit faster. It increases our germination rates as well. Some Bloomsdale spinach, always a yummy one. Here, a little chip for Booker. And let's do some kale, and this is one of my favorites because it's so epically huge, but also the leaves are really tender. This is 1,000 head kale. I got it from Baker Creek. I don't have very many seeds left, but I'm going to plant what I have and make note to order more. And that's good out of that bag. Ooh. We could do some chamomile. The other nice thing with these flats is that you can plant multiple varieties of things. I just recommend things that don't look like each other when they're seedlings so that you can actually distinguish what they are. A spinach seedling grows 2 narrow leaves, and we could grow next to 1,000 head kale, which is going to grow these 2 little almost heart-shaped, it's a brassica seedling. You could look that up. See what that looks like. But these 2 could go nicely together. Woo! Chamomile is gonna have feathery little leaves that could go next to arugula. So again, just don't plant two different types of kale or brassicas or whatnot in the same flat unless you really don't care about keeping your variety separate. But it is nice to know because of plant spacing and such. We went inside to get a glass of water to soak the chard seeds in. I have so many seeds. So the thing that's nice about greens is that you can grow them, blanch them, and freeze them. They're nice to have year round. Where I am here in Arizona, it's too hot to grow spinach in the summer. So I like to grow a lot of spinach in the spring and then blanch it and freeze it. And everybody knows, you know, this much fresh spinach turns into this much cooked spinach. So I really like to go all out with this. So we're gonna be seeding a lot of this. I'm gonna dump this whole packet in there. So I found quite a few packets. Also, if you're gonna soak a bunch of seeds, it's really nice to label them. A lot of things look pretty different in their seed form, but let's just take the guesswork out of it and label them. Let's do the spinach and the kale, just because this 1,000 head kale, like I said, there's only, gosh, I can probably count them. Oh, they're not very many, but it's such a great variety. For those who really like collard, making wraps and stuff, this 1,000 head kale is very similar in that same way. It's just a big, I mean, these leaves get to be huge. So it's a really fun one. And they grow pretty tall too. So again, I'm gonna kind of go through these flats. Anything that's really dry, just throw back in there. So seed depth. Plant double the size of the seed as the planting depth. I'm gonna make a little row of the 1,000 head and then just sprinkle a little bit of this grow medium on top and just lightly pack it down so it's not super floaty and gonna go all over the place. I also wanted to mention you can do really methodical little rows. Sometimes fun to just scatter them in there, but I'll have some intention. The more spacing you have, the easier it is to transplant them, and you're not going to disturb the roots as much. So I'm just going to very gently, that's a chunk of horse poop, cover them lightly so that they're making contact with that wet soil is kind of the key. But you also don't want to totally bury them in there. I do like to make a little trench so that the water is directed to that. One of these things with these flats, if you are not a consistent waterer, they can dry out, and when that happens, which you really don't want when you're doing the germination, that's like the moment to keep it evenly moist for the sake of germination, but also is that the soil can pull away from the sides, kind of like in a planting pot. The medium pulls in, so then when you do go to water again, it has a tendency to just go down the sides. So we really want to keep this consistently damp. So if there's going to be one point in this plant's life that you're consistent with watering, it is right now. Bloomsdale is a great variety. But for this, I'm just going to kind of loosen that soil up like so. And I did read on the back of the packet, it says not recommended to start inside because they don't like root disturbance. There's probably truth to that. And maybe that's worth listening to. But I've also had no issue with starting in flats and then transplanting outside. And one of the big benefits of this is that you're getting a head start on your planting season. You're planting inside where it's a lot warmer, so things are not only going to germinate a lot faster, but they're going to grow a lot faster in that like initial stage of growth. So when you go to plant them out, then they're vigorous and ready to go. If you live in a place with a lot of rodents too, which don't we all, I'm going to take a hefty, again, I have so many packets of spinach, and I'm just going to spread them. And you want to space them out. You don't want super dense clumps. That's probably plenty. But I have found that they tolerate this treatment just fine. So Bloomsdale spinach, We're gonna pack that in there, mix it up a little bit, not overthink it. That's a big thing with gardening. I feel like, we get these details, like all of this, and then they're like, rip the packet open and read all about this seed. And it's really good to, become familiar with what these seeds like, but also at the same time, I think there's almost too much thought goes into it, where I see a lot of people get very cautious around gardening. And I like to encourage people to just let go of the obsession of the instruction and this and that, and which comes over time. You get more comfortable with it, but just relinquishing that control and perfectionism. And the seeds, as long as you keep them wet, they do want to grow. And there are certain things to not bury and trench in the soil, but those guys are done. So speaking of soil depth, we'll do this one next. This is German chamomile from Strictly Medicinal Seeds. It's a very fun website. So these ones, just put them in my hand, are so tiny. They're like dust. They're blowing away. Taking that concept of estimating the planting depth based on the seed size. These seeds are so tiny that they just, after they're done flowering and the seed heads are dry, they cast their own seed and self-seed. Like, they just kind of get caught in the wind or knocked off the plant and dropped onto the soil. So sometimes I like to think about it that way. They're so light that they just scatter themselves, and they actually require some light to germinate. Keeping that in mind. Chamomile, we're not going to want to bury them, really. But I'm going to make some little pockets again so that this water doesn't just run off the sides. I can see it's already starting to pull back a little bit. I'm going to take this whole packet. This has been my practice the last couple of years, is just plant it out. Because if there's something I'm a hoarder of, it is seeds, which is good. But I am just lightly spreading those. Okay. I don't even know if you guys can see this, but they're there. They're probably 50% of them are stuck on my hand right now. Let's do some kale. Another one that's just nice to plant plenty of. So this one is, I don't have that many. I'm going to try and encourage them to not overcrowd. So I'm going to make little rows rather than scattering. Oh, my hands are so cold. Tap them in there. And you do want them to be in contact with the damp soil. A really fine watering head for a small watering can that I like to use, and it's just really gentle, because when you go to water these, because we're not bottom watering, using something that's not going to just have this one main spout of water that's just going to cause this water trench and send the seeds everywhere. You want something that has a really gentle shower head. So I'll show you what I have. It is starting to pull from the sides a little bit, so getting it to cooperate a bit more, taking the chunks of horse manure, the stray wood chips out of there is good. You don't need these. Yeah, and with a soil medium, you really do want just like a fine mix so that the roots have all the freedom. They don't have obstruction or anything. I don't think any of these are labeled anymore. It's kind of gone now, but I'll put A, B, C, and I'll go through the flats and label them in some way, letters or numbers or whatever, and then keep track in my phone or use notebooks and write down specific varieties of things, but keep track of what you have in the flat. And these are a bit smaller than kale. Arugula is so tough. I'm just gonna work it into the soil. So I'm just scattering that in there. I'm gonna take these flats inside, locate that watering can. We'll see how this goes. This is that small watering can that I mentioned. This thing, so you can see, is super fine little holes. This is a Haws brand little watering can. One of the things about these flats is that they don't have a drip tray. So I ended up making a drip tray out of pond liner lying around. So I did have to make my own drip tray for them. You could build them to spec so that they fit drip tray so that you're not having to go get pond liner or something of the like and make a waterproof liner so you're not destroying your floors. The lights don't really need to be on right now, but I do like to keep these seedlings inside for the first 10 to 14 days just to really get them going. And then once they have the second set of leaves, I can start putting them outside. Again, it's going to be kind of weather dependent, how cold it is where you are. If you have cold frames, you can put them out there, cold frames, greenhouses, any kind of season extension to be able to plant things out earlier in the spring. You can see it is a very light rain, so it nicely distributes the water. Let me just go over each one. So again, I would use this method for greens and herbs, perennials and such. I wouldn't use it for root vegetables. I would use it for tomatoes because they're just so vigorous. I would probably not use this method for peppers and eggplants, in part because I like to use this heat mat for those. And it would be hard for that heat to actually reach where the seeds are at. So more on that a different time. But this is great for greens and tomatoes, and perennials, and herbs. So that's all I'm going to do for watering now. Thanks for checking this out.